I know that some folks are going to trickle in as we continue, but I wanted to honor the time of our speakers and of you. So we're going to just go ahead and get started, and folks will come in as they come in. So, hello and welcome. I'm Nicole Springer, Chief Equity Officer and Senior Director of Professional Development and Scholarship with Campus Compact. We are excited about our partnership with the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship as co creators of this series. ACES is an organization that recognizes exceptional leaders who live at the intersection of academics and communities to benefit society. Together, we bring to you this series on addressing wicked issues through community engaged scholarship. This year, we will focus on youth and gun violence, exploring the context, root causes, and how higher education can respond. Today's focus is community engaged teaching and learning. Leading the charge is Campus Compact's Wicked Issues Fellow, Dr. Camille Williamson. And so, without further delay, I will hand this over to Dr. Williamson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Springer. Lovely to be here with you all today and excited to continue this webinar series. So we're going to get started with some brief introductions. With us today are Dr. Lee Smithy, who is a professor of Peace and Conflict Studies and Sociology in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. He has taught a range of courses for 21 years, including gun violence prevention, where he and his students developed the Delaware County Homicide Database. Dr. Lee studies social conflict and social movements, especially ethnopolitical conflict and nonviolent conflict methods. He has focused much of his research on peace building and conflict transformation in Northern Ireland, leading to his book, Unionists, Loyalists, and Conflict Transformation in Northern Ireland. He is a co-primary investigator of the Mural Mapping Project, a longitudinal and geospatial study of murals and public art in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he is co-editor of The Paradox of Repression and Nonviolent Movements. Welcome, Dr. Smithy. And also with us today is Dr. Melissa Fry, who is the Director of Applied Research and Education Center and Professor of Sociology at Indiana University Southeast. At the ERIC, Dr. Fry and a team of undergraduates pursue community-engaged research, needs assessment, and evaluation, including work in youth development, early care and education, housing, health, mental health, substance use disorder, and community and economic development. She is committed to providing solid research to support efforts to build thriving communities. And in 2019, Dr. Fry was named Indiana University's Bicentennial Professor. Welcome, Dr. Fry. All righty. So we are going to jump in with our first question, and I will start with you, Dr. Fry. What is community engaged teaching and learning, and why is it important for all stakeholders that are impacted by wicked issues?
So community engaged teaching and learning can take lots of different forms. I mean, it can be from the simple, inviting someone from the community to come in and speak to your class, to full-on project-based learning courses that are built around a service learning effort. And in between there can also be one thing we do a lot of is indirect service learning, where we might gather publicly available data and really study a community or study an issue within a community, and then deliver the research products that students produce to interested stakeholders within a community. So that's not the same sort of community engagement, but it is an indirect community engaged learning experience for students. So it can take lots of different forms and can partner with all different kinds of organizations, including local governments, nonprofit organizations, or even businesses in some cases. I don't do as much of that, but we have a lot of that going on our campus. And in terms of why it's important for studying and looking at wicked issues is I think wicked issues present an opportunity for students to get sort of this sense of complexity in real world problems. And courses are often defined in a way that is a specific topic, somewhat narrowly defined, especially if they're an elective course, for example. And it helps students see that the issue itself, when you get on the ground and try to address issues, becomes way more complicated. So youth violence involves everything from housing and health to education and substance use disorder and mental health issues and social infrastructure and even infrastructure in communities, physical infrastructure, quality of place. All of these components matter. And students can't really get that from the kinds of books and articles and resources we use in our academic setting. They get a much better handle on that when we start to bring in community partners who have expertise that is distinct from what the professor brings to the class.
So it sounds like what you're saying is community engaged teaching and learning allows for a more immersed 360 experience for students to have a better grasp of how to address wicked problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think they get to see that people in the community are really grappling with, they too exist within their organization, but know that the issue they're addressing is shaped by the rest of their partners in the community, which, are uh, um, it's telling me I'm muted, but I don't think I am.
You are not. We can
So,
hear you.
okay. Um, so it helps them see that even those partners, they too are engaged in needing to look to their community partners and to other sources of knowledge to understand the problems they're trying to address.
So actually taking a step back for both groups and looking at an ecosystem rather than
Mhm.
just the problem, but how it impacts everyone. Dr. Smithy, can you please share why you think community engaged teaching and learning is so important for all stakeholders?
Sure. That was a great overview, Dr. Fry. It's a hard act to follow, but I'll say that I think of engaged teaching and learning as teaching and learning that makes space for partnerships in learning outside of our usual institutional boundaries. And just speaking from my experience at Swarthmore College, that can take all sorts of different shapes. It can literally be my colleagues and their students in inside out prison exchange courses, literally learning together from class to class for an entire semester. It can be collaborative projects like one that two of my colleagues in the art department, Professors Ron Tarver and Jody Joyner, uh, work with their students and the Amir Healing Center, which is here in Philadelphia. And they use their studios and their labs, art labs and studios and equipment on campus to etch portraits of victims of gun violence from Philadelphia onto these glass panes that are part of a renovation of a greenhouse utilized by a local urban organic farming project named Farmer John, Jawn, because we're here in Philadelphia, and it's called the House of the Living, and it was a partnership that came together in just this marriage of dealing with a very hard, difficult, traumatic problem in that neighborhood in Philadelphia with this kind of beautiful artistic metaphor of light shining through the lives of these people, these etched images of people who've been killed by gun violence, nurturing uh, the gardens, producing the food for the neighborhood was just strikes me as a really impactful sort of collaboration. Some projects like mine, in fact, which I'll get to talk about later, are about data collection, the way Dr. Fry described earlier, data collection in service of others who are doing work in the community. Um, and a word about wicked problems. I took it as a cosmic sign that you invited me to come to this series because I had signed this book, Wicked Problems, The Ethics of Action for Peace, Rights, and Justice, to our senior capstone seminar in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies. And I think of wicked problems as those with so many causes and feedback loops that they become difficult to disentangle from one another.
Mhm.
And all of those come to reinforce one another. And the only hope we have of disentangling those things is triangulating our work among people with different perspectives on the problem, and that's why I think the theme of this webinar series, bringing engaged teaching and learning into conversation with a wicked problem like gun violence, is so appropriate. So again, thanks for the invitation to be here today.
Oh, thank you for agreeing to participate today. And I really appreciate the example that you shared because I think oftentimes we're thinking about how to solve a problem in a particular way. And sometimes we have to have spaces for healing as a part of that solution. Um, Sticking with you, Dr. Smithy, how do you think we can leverage community engaged teaching and learning to address the wicked issue of youth and gun violence?
Well, um, personally, I think the work is about helping to empower our neighbors to do the advocacy work to which they're already committed and that they've already been doing. And Dr. Fry, in fact, was very direct about saying our students benefit so much from collaborating with people who have been working on the issue for a long time and have deep personal experience that's hard won, to be sure. And um, that House of the Living, I think, is a great example of that. In my experience, there are always opportunities to learn while in service of local initiatives. If you're teaching about a social problem or a way of addressing social problems in the US, there's inevitably beneficial matches to be made between your learning needs as an educator, as a teacher, and the needs of your neighbors. Um, I would say, like, to really be in service, you have to listen a lot, and come to understand the needs of your partners. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the gun violence prevention course, but we've been working on that now for let's see, like 10 to 12 years at this point. And part of that has been about spending a lot of time listening before we execute things in the design of the project, et cetera, et cetera.
Could you give us an example of what you mean by listen a lot? Like, what does a lot mean?
Yeah. So it's taken a lot of different forms. I mean, sometimes uh, the class that I teach, this gun violence prevention class, has always been built on the premise that we have all these resources here at our institution. We have computers, we have experts in various fields. We have students who are really curious and have a lot of energy and want to make a difference while they're learning. And that's all great, but it's again, it's that matching of what's the actual need of the community partners. And I'll just go ahead and give you an example from the development of the Delaware County homicide database. We started out working with a group called Delaware County United for Sensible Gun Policy. And they were trying to figure out how to trace guns and where they were coming into Delaware County, particularly Chester, from from stores out of state. And they wanted to see if we could trace guns. And we were, of course, eager and keen to help. But when we huddled as a class and started doing some research to figure out, could we actually do that? It actually was too much of a stretch. We couldn't figure out logistically how to do that, particularly in the space of a semester. And so we went back to them and they said, well, what if could you do a database of shootings, gun violence in Delaware County? And we went back and huddled again and did some research and still determined that shootings would be very difficult to track, in part because the documentation of shootings resides in all sorts of different places. However, having done our research, we did go back to them and say, I tell you what we think we can do is a database of homicides. And we know that homicides in our county are mostly gun violence events. It's not as good as a database of shootings, but it was something that we could do that they still wanted and needed. But that
Mhm.
took a bunch of conferencing back and forth and conversations, not just with Delco United, but with some of their partners in the community, which led to a networking that has grown over the past 10 years.
That's a great example. So it sounds like listening to understand and co-develop pathways to solutions.
And to
That's
build
the
relationships.
in the relationship. So that's the lot of it.
Yeah.
Dr. Fry, can you chime in and tell us how we can leverage community engaged teaching and learning to address the wicked issue of youth and gun violence?
So we've done a couple of projects and we're a little different. So some of my projects are attached to service learning courses and some of them are just projects within this community engaged research center where students are involved in every part of every project, but it's not in a class. They work here and they get paid and it's their campus job basically. I'll tell you about two. One was with a class and one is not and is an ongoing project. The first with a class was a community organization trying to build resilience in their community who came to us and said, we would really like to know what the average sort of ACE score for our community, adverse childhood experience score for our community is, because we really think childhood experiences are driving some of the challenges that we're having in our community. And so I had done one in another community, but had figured out all the things we didn't do well with it, right? Like I'd done a
Mhm.
rough draft and knew that if I was going to do it again, I was going to do it different. And so this one we did using a methods course, a sociology methods and statistics course. And we built in some additional questions so we could look at the relationship between adverse childhood experiences and adult outcomes. And the students did a lit review around the impacts of childhood toxic stress and what all of the literature tells us about the potential impacts for adult outcomes. And they presented that publicly to the community ahead of a screening of the documentary Resilience. And then they led a discussion among those community members of the film and its implications for the community. I think that the work on adverse childhood experiences and resilience is quite relevant to preventing gun violence. Making those adult connections, for example, which is one of the key findings of that work, is really important prevention work, both for substance use, for violence, for intimate partner violence, and for gun violence, all of those. More specifically to gun violence is a project we do in Louisville where our partners at the YMCA wanted to do an implementation of an evidence-based healthy relationships program. And our evaluation of that program, they were implementing the way it had been implemented before in Louisville when it became evidence-based, because we were one of the sites where that research happened. And it wasn't working, like students weren't engaging, they weren't coming back for the full program. And so we worked with them to figure out a better way to deliver it. And they ended up developing these camps where kids come, teenagers come and do the evidence-based curriculum on healthy relationships in the morning. And in the afternoon, they have an arts-based program that's where they write songs. They have a recording studio. They have a Best Buy Teen Tech Center that has a recording studio, graphic art computers, opportunities to do like 3D printing and button making and all kinds of activities for them to use, activities and tools for them to use. And youth started doing spoken word poetry videos and writing songs and recording them in the recording studio about their experiences of gun violence in their community in Louisville. And that's a city that has a significant gun violence problem right now. This program has shown pretty significant impacts on youth sense that they have a trusted adult in their life that they can go to for challenges. And when we did our focus groups on this program, one of the key findings we had out of the focus groups was repeatedly youth mentioned that they think the program has the capacity to reduce violence in their communities, that they really wished all the kids at their high school were getting the program because they thought that building healthier relationships was key to reducing violence in their community. So while it wasn't designed to be specifically about gun violence as a wicked problem, this youth development work that builds these resilience skills, builds relationship skills, builds attachment to trusted adults, certainly is an important piece of that prevention work.
I really appreciate the example that you shared because with wicked problems, sometimes we're backing into a solution for something connected to something else. And so I imagine your students had an opportunity to learn to have some openness and nimbleness in addressing, this thing over here and then learning, oh, it's also connected to this over here. And it gives us an opportunity to look at how we can at least ameliorate several problems with
Well, and we now
what we're
have one of
employing.
our students here, we call her a near peer evaluator because she's a young college student. She's not much older than the kids participating in the program. She
Mhm,
actually went to the YMCA's Regional Achievers Conference in the Blue Ridge Mountains with them, immersed herself in their youth development work, and she does ethnographic field observations of this program and really gets engaged with the youth as a participant observer. And she is definitely, herself thinking more and more about what role she wants to have in this kind of work in the future. She came to us as somebody who, was already doing some work with youth camps. So we matched her to this project. And now she's really blossoming in her understanding of what makes that kind of a program work. Why would that kind of a program be able to have an impact on, community level concerns like gun violence, intimate partner violence, these kinds of things. So it really has been a tremendous experience for all of the students who've participated, but that one in particular has been fully immersed in the program while thinking about it with an academic lens toward like what makes this work.
mhm. Absolutely. That's creating an awesome learning experience. Dr. Smithy, can you share some examples of where you have led or participated in a community engaged teaching and learning exercise to address this issue?
Sure. So this is where I get to talk about some experience that I've got through this gun violence prevention course. Let me share my screen here real quick.
Mhm.
Everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. Um, you heard me tell the beginning of the story already about how we arrived at trying to respond to a need that was expressed in um, our local neighborhood community of Delaware County, where advocates for gun violence prevention efforts were saying, we, I mean, we know anecdotally, we know from experience because we live in these neighborhoods, where and when homicides take place, but there is no central repository that's publicly available of information that would, for example, allow us to go to our local city council, our local borough council, our state senators, and present systematic information to them that says we need resources here and here for these different reasons. This was about helping them to make an argument for their work. And we figured out that we thought we could pull off a sort of data set of homicides. And this is the Delaware County Homicide Database, which is at delcohomicides.swarthmore.edu. And first, we had to figure out a methodology to that would allow us to do that. And it's not rocket science. It's not particularly sophisticated, and that's because we were able to download information on homicide incidents from the Uniform Crime Report, which is a very long-standing law enforcement data set that the FBI manages, and law enforcement agencies from all across the United States filter this information up, and it's aggregated, and then it's made publicly available. And you can find it, you can download it. It's a little wonky. Your average, citizen, or resident here in Delaware County, might not know how to get to it or make use of it. And so we're just making it more accessible. And so when we pulled down the Uniform Crime Report, we could get helpful information about, for example, victim sex, race, age. However, it never has a location. It never tells you
Mhm.
where the incident took place. So the what became the student's job, and I think was also a really interesting, useful, unfortunately grim, uh, you know, kind of work, was going through journalistic sources like the Delaware County Daily Times and trying to fill out the information about the homicides, most importantly, where they took place. And most journalists have a convention of saying it happened in the 500 block of Chester Avenue or something like that. And that allows us to map these things. We do also uh, try to collect some other data that's on the screen that I'm showing you now. It's not data that we present to the public, like whether the homicide took place inside or outside. This data is much more spotty because journalists don't always systematically report all of this information in any given story. But we went to our ITS department at Swarthmore and said, we want to uh, present this data in a user-friendly way that's interactive. We want to give this information back to the community. And I'll jump over to the actual homicide database itself. And you can see here, let me move some things around on my screen. Um, this shows data from 2005 to 2019, broken down across some of those demographic variables like age and sex and race. You can also go in and click to filter incidents if you want to sort of custom make the visualization for whatever you're interested in. Um, and um, This, in fact, I'll show you if I, for example, just look only at firearms related homicides. You can see how the graph changes over time, and it also uh, confirms things that we already unfortunately know about gun violence, that it tends to impact young Black men most. Um, first and worst, essentially. And so let's see, what else do I want to say about that? I think I was going to also say that this has become a difficult project. You'll notice that the data only goes to 2019. Um, we all remember what happened in 2020, which was the pandemic, and I think that has part of it to do with it. Also, I only get to teach this class every other year, sometimes every third year. I see Dr. Fry nodding her head. That I would love to teach it once a year, but just because of teaching demands,
Mhm.
that puts a kink in things. But most importantly, and I'll try to wrap this up just by letting you know where we're at now with the work. Um, the the federal government stopped using the Uniform Crime Report in 2021 and shifted to the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And I'm going to skip back over to the slides here. Um, Unfortunately, that transition from the UCR to the NIBRS has been very incomplete and problematic. And I see Dr. Fry nodding her head again. And so it has been difficult, nigh on impossible for us to download reliable information about homicides. And I also want to say that journalistic work that the students are doing is impacted by, this is again part of what makes this problem wicked, is that we have a parallel constriction of formal journalism. We all know that from the newspapers in the cities and towns that we live in and across the United States, which also constricts reporting about homicides and the amount of available data that is available. I can show you, I actually went, by the way, as I pointed out, the data goes to 2019 here on the dashboard. But just to give you some sense, the rates have gone down somewhat, but are still in the range of what we have expected in previous years. This is medical examiner aggregate data, not incident level data. And this morning I went to the NIBRS just to check in and see if maybe things have improved in ways that I was hoping for. But as you can see in this slide, the switch to the NIBRS, this is their report for Chester City Police, which you can tell from the heat map here. This is Chester right here. This is really an epicenter of gun violence in our county. But when you go to the NIBRS, we launched here in 2022. This number 35 is about accurate. That's about what I would expect for the number of homicides in Chester. But there's no information for 2021. And these numbers for 2022 and 2023 are not what we would expect. I don't think they have dropped that much.
Mhm.
So the last point I'll make is that this in itself has been a pedagogical tool for the students to have to try to get their head around how our society does or does not collect data and why. Political reasons, maybe profit reasons. Um, there was a pandemic, uh, the technological issues, all that sort of thing. That has become topics of discussion in the class. And the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility at Swarthmore has kindly supported this project over the years in lots of different ways, but they've also funded research assistance to help us solve this problem, which is yet more opportunities for students that are related to the class but are outside of the classroom. So I'll stop there for the moment and hand back over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smithy, for sharing the database and connecting it to a student's learning experience and how more than likely as a result of what's happened with the switch of the database that you all were working with, how that creates, well, adds more wickedness into the problem that you were already exploring, is what it sounds like to me.
And just one sentence. The flip side of it is that it has driven us into more relationships and networking with a whole range of other stakeholders around this issue, trying to find the information. And so a spin-off side effect has
Mhm.
been more networking, information sharing, which has also been a positive thing for the students to see and participate in.
So I just want to say about that. It's so for people who aren't, it looks like people on this probably are very familiar with the problems of this data, but you know, some of the issue with NIBRS is that it's voluntary whether local law enforcement reports.
Mhm.
And so it's a real challenge to get decent data on any crime issue, but particularly on politically loaded things like gun violence, which I, we could have a whole discussion of the fact that that is politically loaded. But it's also an issue, and I just want to raise this as a affirming of the networking that you then talked about to try to get good information. I tried to write a talk, or I did write a talk several years ago on police shootings and race, right? Trying to look at racial dynamics all across the country and police shootings. And same issues with the data. And most of us know this story where the Boston Globe and other news agencies decided to create their own database where news outlets all over the country, rural and urban and, you know, from coast to coast, all across the plains, like they built their own database because we don't have good information on this at the national level. And I think there's just such an important lesson there in thinking about who would have information on these things, who are good, reliable partners on this. How do we keep the politics out of it and just get a good count? And how do we, you know, all of those things. So I find it fascinating and kind of wonderful that you were able to turn that into a learning experience for the students about the
Absolutely.
importance of those networks too.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing up the nimbleness and the importance of relationship building. And to that end, I'd like to get into higher ed's role a little bit more. As it pertains to community engaged teaching and learning, I think you all have set an excellent stage of how um, of providing some specific examples about uh, how to engage in this particular type of solution oriented approach. But I'm wondering, how should this be reflected in curriculum and training and student resident organizations and service learning across the university? And I bet you can tell where I'm going with this. Oftentimes, our initial uh, higher ed's initial engagement with communities that are most impacted by wicked issues. Sometimes we don't have the best history, and sometimes we have some baggage. And sometimes there are some things that we haven't addressed in terms of, what happens when this large institution is sitting in a community that is experiencing the wicked problem, but there hasn't been an equity based approach to helping the community in which the now university is a part of to help solve it. So I'm wondering, what are some broad stroke things that higher ed should be doing? Because I've noticed that both of you don't get to teach these particular types of classes all the time. So let's start with you, Dr. Fryer. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say there's two sort of, I'm not going to call them parallel because they're intersecting and running together to some degree, but there's two movements happening in higher ed that I think are both really important to navigating our role differently. One is community engagement has grown, right? And
Mhm,
more institutions are trying to institutionalize it. And really, there's also a strong political mandate to institutionalize it more effectively. I work at a regional comprehensive. One of the advantages of that is that we're expected to be a resource to our region in a way that the state flagship is not as much, right? It is the ivory tower, which we need an ivory tower. I
mhm,
depend on their work a lot.
mhm,
But we are in a different position. And the work that I do at this center is very much valued by my state legislators, by local government entities. I just did a presentation last night to a city council. I do a lot of that. So I think that there's this movement to build more courses in a way that involves this kind of engagement and serves the public interest, really serves higher ed's the public purposes of higher education in terms of not just turning out well-educated critical thinkers who are ready engage after they leave, but critical thinkers who are learning using the challenges our communities are facing today as the material for developing those skills, right? And are learning more, at least at this regional campus, about the community actors that are involved. That shift also involves an honoring of different types of ways of knowing, right? The
mhm,
epistemological diversity in community engaged learning is such an important part of it. And I think as you see more institutionalization of community engaged teaching and learning, we're going to be able to build more effectively on um, the power of that diversity of ways of knowing in terms of integrating community partners into our courses in a more seamless way, or at least more frequently in the curriculum, perhaps. At the same time, we have to reserve space. We have to reserve space for learning those fundamentals and for learning the kinds of work that come out of basic research and our more traditional ivory tower ways of building knowledge, because there's a purity to some of that, although we could have a whole conversation about that, that is
mhm,
useful, but it has to go get tested then out in communities. Like we have to, and be in conversation with people who are seeing things on the ground that don't match what we've been saying is going on from that ivory tower position. So I think there's that. At the same time, I think there's a reorganization around thinking about disciplines. So at least at IU, and I mean across the whole 9 campus IU system, we're having a lot of conversations about breaking down disciplinary barriers, not completely and not in terms of training necessarily, but thinking about building community engaged research and learning opportunities that are interdisciplinary and that are really issue based. So
mhm,
maybe you see, across our campuses, we have a group that's working on affordable housing, and it's interdisciplinary, and we're teaching courses in the business school and in the arts and letters and in social sciences, all around building affordable, healthy housing, maybe. And so maybe we're also considering environmental factor. Well, we should for any housing, environmental factors from our natural sciences programs, social dynamics from our social sciences, small business development in communities that have mixed income housing from our business school. I mean, there's a lot of dynamic ways we can think about educating in community engaged ways that are really moving us to a new way of teaching and learning. And we're playing around a lot with those ideas right now in the IU system. And I hope others are doing the same in the places where they are doing this work.
That's really interesting, and I appreciate the example because sometimes I think when we have thick walls in between our disciplines, it does a disservice to everyone's learning. It does and it doesn't necessarily help us conceptualize problems in a way in which we see ourselves as a part of being those impacted until it's too late. Or now we have a bigger mess to clean up than we realize.
And we've modeled this a little bit, not me personally, but the IU Center for Rural Engagement, they've done a program where they adopt a community, a county, and they basically match up various actors in that county and the issues they're working on to courses at IU. And so they do like 400 students,
Wow.
ascend on a rural community doing maybe
Wow.
23 different projects, that are helping in different places in that community in different ways, but it's all coordinated through a coordinated community planning effort that's
Mm,
facilitated by that center. And so like that's a model that, really gets at taking a community that's maybe having economic challenges and thinking about it in a 360 way, what's the role of the arts, what's the role of all these different entities, and then how can the university bring its resources to bear in ways that are teaching our students, we're meeting our objectives for their education at the same time that we're helping that community generate some new ideas and some new strategies for solving problems.
mm. Dr. Smithy, do you have anything to add in terms of like what are some broad stroke measures that higher ed should be looking into to address, to use community engaged teaching and learning to address wicked issues such as youth and gun violence?
Yeah, this is really Dr. Fry's wheelhouse, but I can offer a few observations. It's been exciting. At Swarthmore, it's been exciting to see the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility grow and develop and become more sophisticated in the ways that they can mentor all of us in experiential learning and engaged learning that is ethical and sensitive and about that relationship building and longer term partnerships. I feel like, sustainability is always a challenge in these, projects that are connected to one class or two classes, and they don't get
Mhm.
taught for 2 or 3 years, and then you've kind of disappeared, and the community partners are wondering, like, well, what happened? Where did it go? But when we have the Lang Center that helps to maintain those relationships and those networks, and it's taken time to build those. That's all really good. And I feel as if there are more opportunities for students than ever to get engaged in engaged scholarship than there was, say, 10 years ago, even.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
all really
Definitely.
encouraging. And I still think we have a long way to go in terms of thinking about how our work is not extractive, for our pedagogical, our curricular purposes. I mean, we always have to make some judgments about what actually helps serves our students and makes the learning process best all around for community partners and our students. But I suppose, uh, and I think this is true of lots of colleges and universities, but who have expanding campuses and large endowments, and the communities around them sort of see a kind of perpetual inequality in resources, and those resources aren't necessarily available to them
Mhm.
unless they're in the service of our curriculum and our teaching, and which is all good stuff and it's value added. But I can understand how there's a hill there for us to climb over to get to one another. And I think we have to keep thinking about that and continuing to try to come up with more expansive ways of sharing resources.
Mm, I really appreciate that. Are there any other partnerships or projects that either of you are involved in that look at addressing this wicked issue that you would like us to highlight? I ask that question because there's always a follow-up email after these webinars that provide links or mentionings of those things that you would like people to look out for, participate in, or support.
I suppose I can jump in there. Um, so part of the story I didn't tell earlier about the Delaware County homicide database was some beautiful serendipity that pushed this project along. We had a student radio program called War News Radio. This was back during in the wake of the Iraq War, or the American War in Iraq. And the Lang Center hired a Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist, Jim McMillan, who had worked for the Philadelphia Daily News for years and years and years. And uh, Jim came to help coach along that student radio project. And we got introduced, and I said to him, have you ever heard of the subfield of peace journalism, which is a little, subfield of peace and conflict studies? He said, no, I've never heard of that. And we started talking about it, and he got interested in it. He ended up teaching a course for us on peace journalism. And that was right around the time that I was talking with Delaware County United for Sensible Gun Policy. And Jim, having reported on so many homicides over the course of his career, gun shootings in his career as a journalist in Philadelphia, started talking to me about his experience and his interest in gun violence issues and prevention. And so he formed a collaborative of local volunteer journalists who banded together to try and improve the amount of coverage of gun violence and also the quality of coverage of gun violence. And we just fed off of each other. I learned as much as I could from him, and he learned as much as he could from me about peace journalism, even though I'm not a journalist. And when he left Swarthmore, he went and founded the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting, where he's still at. And in part, inspired by what our class was working on, and I'll share my screen one more time here quickly. Uh, he developed the a dashboard for Philadelphia. So now we're
Mhm,
just outside. If you remember the heat map, you might have seen that we're
mhm,
just southwest of Philadelphia. Delaware County borders Philadelphia County, or Philadelphia City, the metropolitan area. And just as an illustration of what Dr. Fry was talking about how some municipalities have great data. So we have a project here called Open Data Philly, where by order or mandate of the city council and the mayor's office, all agencies, fire, mental health, public health, law enforcement, etc., have to upload data into this repository.
mhm,
And it's open access. Any of us can visit it. And so Jim got some technical wizards to create this dashboard and essentially just plugged it into Open Data Philly. And they have, as you'll notice, it says Philadelphia shooting victims. So there's about a 3 day lag here, but they don't have to do anything. They just watch the figures appear about not only gun homicides but shootings.
mhm,
Out here in the suburbs, one county over, we only got a health department in 2022 or 2023. Our county had never had a public health department before. And so it's a totally different universe, and it's only about 6 or 7 miles that way. Um, so why am I telling you this? This is one thing that I wanted you to be aware of, and I also just wanted to, in plugging the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting, a lot of what they have done also has been around trauma-informed journalism,
Mhm.
and thinking carefully about the ways in which journalists talk about gun violence and what that means for survivors of gun violence. And they have deep relationships with trauma surgeons in Philadelphia,
Amazing.
have become their partners in doing a lot of this work. And I could name a bunch of other organizations, but I won't right now, so I don't take up time. This is just one.
Thank you for sharing, and we can get a list from both of you all later. Dr. Fry, are there any projects or partnerships that you want to highlight?
No, I think I talked some about our really the YMCA one. I would say is the closest thing to this specific space. We do though work on also on mental health and substance use disorder, which certainly is a piece of this issue. But I never want to overstate that piece because it certainly is not all of the issue at all, and people like to pretend it is. But this youth program in Louisville on the issue of not being extractive, we do. When we do focus groups, for example, like we pay the youth, we stay engaged with our partners across all of our projects when we're not doing projects so that we're not
Mhm.
somebody who swoops in like a comet, grabs what we need, and leaves. But we also do compensation. We do try to pay participants in all of our projects, and we budget that into project budgets. And we are just about to hire a couple of teenage high school kids to be on our evaluation team as youth
Nice.
advisors for the evaluation, which we're really excited about because those kids then will work with them on learning some data skills and helping us interpret data so that their voice is part of our understanding of what the data are telling us. And I think those kinds of ways of building partnership are really important to making sure that we're not just being extractive. And we are different because we're getting hired by these organizations. So that's, it's a different dynamic. At the
Mhm.
same time, the reason they come back is because we don't do this in a way that leaves them feeling like, oh, we got what we need, we got paid, and then we walked away.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
I really appreciate you saying that. My last question before we move into small breakout groups with participants. Um, in this work, any kind of wicked problem, I think oftentimes we're dealing with what does everybody understand? What are the facts that everybody is working with? And I want to emphasize facts, not alternative facts, real scientific research that gives us a scientific understanding of what is happening, what is the problem, what are the elements of this problem that we absolutely know. So, how are you combating misinformation and disinformation about this problem? And let's start with you, Dr. Smith.
Um, at the risk of being obvious, the Delaware County Homicide Database is our attempt to combat the lack of information, the sort of vacuum of information that's available. And this was actually the point at which I thought I'd share about Jim McMillan's work on better gun violence reporting, because it's been a kind of sister program of ours. Um, I would just say that that's exactly what we're trying to do, just as I presented it earlier.
Thank you for sharing that. So, at least providing a baseline of factual information. Dr. Fry, how are you combating misinformation and disinformation?
yeah, I think that's right. We generally, with all of our projects, including ones related to this issue, we tend to use sort of academic data that where there've been more randomized or experimental designs and things like that. We want to bring that into dialogue with publicly available data that is collected consistently over time and teach people about the importance of that. Many of those data are at risk at this moment, which is terrifying to me because it's a lot of information that's very important to communities. So we
Mhm.
bring the academic work into dialogue with that and community people's experiences. And we really try to keep people grounded and say, if we're going to discuss this issue, we're going to use these shared reference points. We're not going to be pulling in stuff that we can't verify and that you heard on YouTube. We're going to stick to these shared reference points. So many of our research products, including a housing study we just released, that's the purpose of it. The purpose is to be a set of shared reference points that are quality data from which a group of organizations can then have conversations about how to address the issue. And I think that getting communities to do that, to focus on solid quality data and say, this is what we're going to use to have this conversation. We're not going to pull in these other random things. And I think that's just important set of agreements for communities.
I really like how you framed that using these sets of data is an agreement to do this work, not an option. So I think sometimes, and I can attest to this, even in conversations with family members, sometimes you get a lot of, well, I heard, well, I think, well, I read this and this particular thing, like something at like a grocery store, not, a peer-reviewed journal article or not a book written by an expert. Or sometimes people just aren't aware of how algorithms work on social media and that it's driven by what you tend to click on the most. And sometimes you can be in your own echo chamber, and that doesn't mean that your echo chamber is informing you properly. And so I really appreciate the way that you framed it as like we need to agree that we're going to use this data and data-driven approaches for decision making. At this time, I'm not aware of how many participants that we have. However, we do like to not just spend the whole time with me leading or facilitating a discussion, but I'm wondering if instead of doing a small group discussion, because it looks like it's a more intimate group today, are there any questions from participants who are here with us? And you can feel free to put them in the chat. Also want to note that there are some specific references to partnerships and projects that have been posted in the chat by Dr. Springer and Dr. Smithy.
Hi guys, Caleb Perkins. I'm actually also doing this work out here in Springfield, Ohio. I just wanted to say thank you for putting on this series and for the hard work that you guys are also putting into this field. It is truly appreciated. So no questions right now, but I did want to say thank you for speaking today.
Thank you for attending. Okay. Well, true to my form as an educator, although I'm not hearing any questions, I have questions for people who are here today. So since we are an intimate group, my first question for everyone, and feel free to maybe use the hand raise feature. Oh, I see there is a question in the chat. So before I get to my question, I will go ahead and ask. There's a question here from Ellen Alcorn. Dr. Fry, I'd love to hear more about the Healthy Relationships program at the YMCA. Is that written up somewhere?
So right now it's not yet published like in a peer-reviewed journal, though we're working on that with our rigorous evaluation with this current grant. But we do have an evaluation report that we produced for the feds last year, and they made us make it flashy and public facing. So I'd be happy to send that along if you want to give me an email address.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
I will tell you, we were not allowed to be very technical with it. That was part of the rules. It had to be like plain language and not our full analyses, but rather, for more digestible presentation, which is good, but.
That is good. I appreciate the accessibility. So based upon what we've discussed today, what ideas are developing based upon these concepts, particular skills and practices from today's panelists? What are some thoughts and ideas that participants have or things that are brewing? And it doesn't have to be perfect.
I didn't know if I should raise my hand or if I should just jump back in.
Sure.
So kind of, and this was earlier in the discussion, you guys were pretty much touching base on like the social determinants of health, right? And how impactful those are in or influencing, um, the causal factors of youth gun violence. Do you believe that there's any areas that may not have been potentially assessed yet as a potential causal factor? Um,
Mm.
or maybe for lack of better terms, is there somewhere that we may not be focusing enough attention in the currently literature?
Dr. Smithy, would you like to start?
That's a tough one. That gets at the wicked problem part. Because I was saying earlier, there are so many different contributing factors that all reinforce, coexist with one another. Um, I trying to pick one is the hard part because they're all so important. I think that I'll say that um, there is already work being done on uh, okay, so this is a public health approach, and I'm no epidemiologist or anything like that, but we hear public health experts saying violence spreads in much of the same way that diseases do, that there's a contagion effect. And I find it as a social scientist and not a natural scientist, I find it a useful analogy and metaphor um, for understanding how gun violence spreads. In my understanding, that contagion effect is driven in part by not just violence or guns as a vector for violence, maybe the way we would think of, microbes or something as a vector for disease, but that it has a lot to do with the health of people who are vulnerable to gun violence. So in other words, in certain areas, I was in fact listening on the radio earlier today. I heard someone who is a doctor in a country where there's lots of malnutrition talking about how hard it is for children to recover from even small wounds and cuts and that sort of thing because their bodies are not resourced in order to do that defensive work and that healing work. And in a lot of communities that are prone to gun violence, uh, trauma and marginalization and disrespect are all sort of attacks on the um, make them vulnerable to infection, so to speak. And so I think if we could continue to think about public health ways of studying the problem and recognizing that, this is largely about conditions in which a huge gun industry can that a huge gun industry can take advantage of. Um, I think that would be helpful. I know there's already a lot of work being done on that, but I think there can continue to be fruitful findings.
I appreciate that. Dr. Fry?
Yeah, I think so. Over the course of this conversation, it was clear to me from some of Dr. Smithy's remarks that both of us tend to draw on systems thinking and feedback loops, understanding feedback loops in communities and how they operate. And I have historically taught a course. I designed and taught a course called The Community. Um, Communities are comprised of all these components of the system, of the community system, and our communities are broken. And it's all these different pieces that are playing a part, but it does make us quite vulnerable um, to things like the rise of gun violence when weapons are easy to access, and we've torn down sort of commitments to each other and to the institutions we share. And so, some of the civic education pieces of the community engagement space, I think, are really important to that, but they're not separate from all these other pieces. I'm going to go ahead and, if it's okay, share the visual that I had thought about sharing earlier. So when
Sure.
I try to describe systems, I'm not going to show you a big systems map with all the feedback loops, though we could build one of those, certainly for gun violence. But I usually try to explain to my public audiences, because that's who I'm usually doing this with, is just regular folks, that our community is a system, and there are other components too, but these are some of the broad sort of spaces in our community that we tend to look at, and they all affect one another. When you make a change in one, it's causing all those gears to shift, right? Um, and gun violence, if we look, if I can get it to switch to the next slide. Oh, there we Gun violence, or safety and violence is what I put at the, sorry, having some trouble. Safety and violence is what I put at the center of this particular one for this conversation. But this slide was actually created for another talk on place-based learning and the ways that, these systems are part of, all of these gears that I have in this diagram are affected by things like entrepreneurship. Our ag and food systems shape, how far our wages go in keeping us healthy, and also affects our quality of place in our environment, right? All of those things. And our different schools and disciplines give us different ways of sort of addressing or thinking about the connections across those issues. So my earlier comments about interdisciplinarity are really about thinking about grabbing hold of these problems in that systems way. And when you do that, I think you end up uncovering some of the spaces that haven't been addressed, like the connector points between some of those things. And I suspect there are places where we haven't looked closely enough at a particular intersection of two areas of the system. But I think for me, the fabric of communities is sort of overarching in that. And it catches a bunch of that. So it's sort of cheating for me to say that. But really, that commitment to our shared life as communities, our commitment to each other and to the institutions that we depend on and share. I feel like we just have no real dialogue around that right now. Everything is about difference and pulling us apart and seeing the other as other, rather than embracing any sense of an us and a we. And you can't build healthy communities that way. You just can't.
I would also offer that in addition to social determinants of health, we have to look at structural determinants of health. So there are systems at play, institutions at play that are driving the creation of the conditions that we all live in. We're in the midst of major upheaval within government. We're in the midst of a just a big cloud of uncertainty about how that's going to impact how people receive health care. Is it going to be quality health care? How people are going to maintain education K through college? Is it going to be quality education? Is it going to be inclusive? Are people going to experience new barriers that they're not used to and have trouble navigating? And typically, systems of government, institutions, they don't have like a quick turnaround. It's extremely slow, sometimes a generation slow. It took us a long time to get to the Affordable Care Act, and it's still not quite perfect. And we're still not caught up with other developed countries that just have universal health care for all. Because in the long run, universal health care for all is cheaper and people are healthier and have a better quality of life with that particular type of policy at play. So I would offer that one of the things that I think is important in community engaged teaching and learning is to get students really comfortable with talking about politics. I think a lot of us have grown up in spaces where talking about politics is seen as uncomfortable or inappropriate, but the reality is everything surrounding our lives to who decided what color gray this shirt was going to be, it's all politics. Who decided where the shirt was going to be made, it's all politics. Who decided how much the shirt was going to cost, all politics. So we have to get comfortable with understanding politics as it pertains to the systems and institutions that create the circumstances and the conditions that we all live in, as a part of a root cause analysis of all the different areas that we need to look at when it comes down to a wicked problem, especially since we know wicked problems touch or are entwined with others.
Well, and I'll be very quick because I want to let other people talk, but I think one of our biggest challenges is the fact of the matter is what distinguishes us from Europe is in part our diversity, and that we have completely and totally failed to just face up to and deal with the way that race has presented us from having good social programs. And we did it from
Absolutely.
day one. We did it from passing Social Security Act with exceptions for agricultural workers and domestics, right?
Mhm.
Like we built it into the fabric of our social safety net that we were going to continue to draw lines of difference across race. And race continues to be part of why we can't get support for policies that actually serve rural white communities as well or better than they do urban Black communities, right? Or even rural Black communities, right? So
Mhm.
I think that part of what has happened to us in these last several years is we had a reckoning in 2020 where it felt like we were going to finally go there. And boy, the backlash came so hard, and we are now in the eye of that storm of no, 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 you are not going to take that key piece out, that keystone that has held up this system that has kept, inequality in place and has kept us from having a full and really useful and safety net that actually it builds thriving communities, not just safety net, social infrastructure and infrastructure for thriving communities and thriving people, right? It we simply haven't done it, and I really think it every time the argument ends up coming back to people won't vote for something that they think is going to benefit people of color.
And I think that is a part of the strategy to not go there, to just continue this assumption that people won't vote. But what really is happening is are not being educated with facts. We're not all in agreement that we're going to use facts as a way to make the data-driven decision making. I saw you came off mute, Dr. Smith.
Well, I was just going to follow up on what Dr. Fry was saying, and arguably that that political undercurrent that you're talking about, that's so deeply imbued with, racial prejudice and discrimination, arguably goes all the way back to the founding of the country, that we can sort of see repeatedly, whether it's, the development of our founding documents and slavery and the civil rights era. It's the same thing happening over and over again. And like you said, this backlash is um, uh, looks like a lot of other backlashes we've seen over the course of the history of the United States.
Absolutely. Well, I could talk about this for days, but I want to also hear from other participants who are here with us today. Are there any thoughts or ideas that are emerging for you based upon our panel discussion this afternoon about how to address this particular wicked issue of youth and gun violence, or something connected to it?
I'm the chaplain at Episcopal Community Services, and its hub of programs and services are located at 60th and Girard in West Philly. So from the time that we revisioned the intent of this building from a women and children's shelter into a place of programs and services to help bring people out of intergenerational poverty, all of which was prompted by an assessment, community assessment. Another core piece in that assessment response was the ongoing challenge of gun violence and its impact on people at so many different levels. We are interested in providing something, and we don't know what that is right now, to help support young people in particular on this issue. But at present, most of those individuals who frequent St. Barnabas Community Resource Center are middle-aged and older. If they're bringing children, if they're younger children to access the pantry, for example, or something. And so I would welcome any thoughts about a direction where we might go to just sort of invite some initial conversation and maybe build something organically that would be of support to young people.
I have some thoughts, but I'd like to engage our panelists as well or other participants. Dr. Fry, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how are you working with partners right now on building some of those? I mean, are you when you're talking about partnering with folks to build things, what are you doing right now that you might be able to build on relationships that exist?
Well, there's sort of two efforts. One, in terms of gun violence in and of itself, we're engaged in some advocacy work, gun violence prevention rallies in Harrisburg, partnerships with organizations like Heeding God's Call, interfaith work. And then in terms of the scope of the work that's happening here at St. Barnabas Community Resource Center, it's providing programs and services very much within the profile of what you shared. Health
Okay.
and wellness,
Yeah.
family stability. We have a mindset program that's a multi-year program working with individuals to address all those different issues. Education and training, career and employment,
Right.
food access, variety of things. Housing is another.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you want to build additional programming that's specifically targeting the youth
Right.
in the community. Yeah. I think I'm going to send the report out to you and to Ellen, who also asked for it. They're building a blueprint. So like a nice template for people to use to build similar programs. I do think, I think it's always challenging because getting teens to want to show up to something is really, how do you design something they want to be at?
Right.
And this one, we've had teens repeat this program 5 and 6 times.
Okay.
It's the same evidence-based curriculum every time, and they've repeated it. Now, what they tell us is, the repeaters tell us they repeat because they have created a space there where those kids feel safe and they feel like they can talk about things in a way that that's about them. It's not about the adults or the adults' thoughts about how they should talk,
Right.
It's really about them. And, a key element of that is peer facilitators and having young people, young adults and peers be the folks delivering programs. So it creates a space that really is all about them. And I think teens do want those spaces and spaces where they can talk about things they don't usually talk about. So, these are topics that they've been told over and over again are not appropriate for conversation or not, things you should talk to so-and-so about or whatever. And this provides a space where they can acknowledge challenges they've had. They can, share their feelings and talk about it in their language. And that's what they report is most important to them. So whatever you build, creating spaces that are really driven by the teens and are for them to have their space, I think is very important.
I would agree with that. As somebody who used to do a lot of youth programming, I have found that in the initial steps of introducing programs, young people need the space to have co-ownership. And it sounds like that's what Dr. Fry is describing. And that co-ownership allows them to shape and design something that is specific to where they are in their human development, what are the things that are important to them, so they see themselves in the programming. And that is a sustainability factor that I would encourage anybody working with any population to take that approach. Dr. Smithy, do you have anything to add in response?
No, I wanted to hear what your comments were. I was curious to hear what you were going to say. Um, and just to say, uh, again, the Lang Center at Swarthmore works with a fair number of programs in the Philadelphia area. And if it would be helpful, I would be happy to make introductions and
Mm,
just just compare notes, and see if what pops up. Because, my experience, as I expressed before, is that um, so much of what works and is sometimes kind of magic
mm,
about engaged learning and teaching is the serendipitous connections that get made. I don't know if any of you are familiar with John Paul Lederach's book, The Moral Imagination, about the art of peace building. He has a whole chapter on serendipity as one ingredient that's so important to this kind of work. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy I got your email actually
Good.
from the chat. I can drop you an email. Happy to talk.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much.
One other thing I would add in terms of programming with young people, I think I've also seen success in programming that I have worked with or developed if at the, let's say, the end cycle of that person's term in that program is also a pathway that lets them continue exploring their interests in the form of education and experience that they get paid for. So, how does this funnel? Because I could see a connection between what you're doing as the chaplain and the Lang Center. Like, if you have young people who are interested in journalism, that might be the serendipitous connection that you're talking about,
Mhm.
Dr. Smith. And in that regard, what are some opportunities for young people to experience a college campus or experience project-based learning with college students that helps to broaden their insights, helps to maintain their interests. I think when a person has a big job of growing up, they need a lot of support, not only to grow up, but also place and space to explore interests safely. Again, with fact-based learning.
Right. Thank you.
We have
And
about,
just
oh,
I was
please,
going to say,
please
no,
continue.
no, you're fine. Just to add to that, and Dr. Fry, you already touched based on it. You need the voices of the kids. Like first and foremost, if you're going to try and get it off the ground, you got to give them something that they can take ownership in, right? And a lot of these kids, at least the ones that I believe we were going to be focusing on in this work, they are already being parented to. Like they're being told left and right, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, you can't do this, you can't say that. They're they're already used to that. They need to be given that opportunity to be seen and to be heard and to have their voice mean more than just you're screwing up. So when you give them that opportunity to take that accountability and to take that ownership, that's empowering, right? So the more you can empower them, the more hope you can give them um, to take that ownership and that responsibility, the the more surprising you'll see the outcomes will be.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any other burning questions that we have? I see that Roger, you put a resource in the chat, American Evaluation
Yeah,
Association, topical interest group
we're
on
in it.
participatory evaluation.
I just figured that you probably were. Yes.
Mhm.
We're submitting this project for next year's meeting to present on it. So yeah,
Fabulous. Glad you're involved.
yeah. I will
Thank
say
you.
on Camille's last comment, I want to note that we have had several youth who participated in that program have become YMCA employees. One of them got hired onto the sort of the next grant. We had one grant and now we have a second grant. And she is now like instrumental in kind of overseeing the peer evaluation process.
Lovely.
And she was a teenager who, when they first went to her class with the program, she had, she was slouched down with her hoodie up in the corner. And then they got to the lesson on red flags in relationships, and she kind of perked up like, oh, this might be important.
Okay.
And now she runs the show. And so, and they have another youth who witnessed, and this, we have permission to share this story, witnessed his one parent, his father, shooting his mother when he was 5 years old, and was really struggling. And his football coach had worked at the Y, referred him to the Y, and the YMCA put him into this program. And he showed up and had challenges, and they'd take him sometimes out of the room when he was struggling and take him to shoot hoops in the gym so he could talk through whatever was coming up for him. And in the end, he ended up recording himself, singing a song, sort of spoken word kind of thing, explaining that he had never felt his feelings from that time as a small child until he came to this program. And Love Notes, the program's called Love Notes, and the curriculum is, and Love Notes taught him like how to do that, how to have those feelings and feel them, and that what he saw as a kid wasn't love.
Mhm.
Love is something else that shouldn't hurt. And so I think, obviously that's not about my student experience, it's about the youth development experience, but that child now, he works at the Y. And so, so I just think there are real wonderful opportunities to see transformation through well-designed programs that give youth voice. And we get to learn from them.
Can I offer one
Absolutely.
observation real quick, Dr. Williamson?
Absolutely.
So this takes us back to engaged teaching and learning, but the conversation that was just going on there reminded me that when it comes to gun violence, that is a topic that, sure, as you saw on the heat map, Chester, nearby Swarthmore, but 3 or 4 miles away, is an epicenter of gun violence. But having taught this class for a decade, I have students in my class who are survivors of gun violence because they've had friends or family. And so it's important to do trauma-informed work when you're working with community partners. But I found that we have to have a trauma-informed class. And, there will be a whole range of students who would never dream of having lost a loved one to gun violence, to students who actually have experienced it and are experiencing it and are probably in the class in part because they're still grappling with that trauma. And yeah, it's just a reminder to us who do this kind of work that we get all sorts of people in our classes. And sadly, gun violence is prevalent enough in the United States that we can't be surprised.
Right. Right.
I really appreciate you raising that and the importance of having a trauma-informed learning experience, which I think goes hand in hand with community engaged teaching and learning. Consequently, we're about to do a pilot of a trauma-informed leadership training at my full-time position at the American Medical Association, because with everything that we've been through for the last 5 years, I think we're all a bit rattled. And it's showing up in, you know, our work, our health, and our relationships. Oh my goodness, we've been having such a good time. We are at time. I want to take this moment to close us out and reiterate that this is a recorded webinar. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to make it, I know this will be posted on the Campus Compact website at some point. And there are follow-up emails that include links that panelists or participants provide in the chat so that people can follow up on those resources. I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Fry and Dr. Smithy for being with us this afternoon. I really appreciated this wonderful dialogue. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did. And I also want to thank Dr. Springer for handling all of our logistics for this webinar and taking the time to kick us off. As you will see in the chat, Dr. Springer True to form, with the logistics, it's already indicated that our next session is scheduled for Wednesday, April 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is going to be focused on student-led civic engagement. So these are going to be students who are going to be panelists coming up next month. Please consider coming back and inviting your colleagues. I see the link to register is also in the chat. Thank you all so much for coming and attending and listening and engaging. And I hope to see you again next month. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.